friends, welcome back to the studio. So today I'm going to be finally getting around to a very important topic in the studio, and that is safety. So yeah, let's just get into the methods that you should be following for a safe pottery studio. So the first safety practice that I want to be talking with you guys about, and arguably the most important, is that you should always be cleaning wet. So what I mean by this is you want to be cleaning with a sponge, a wet sponge, and you want to be mopping your floors. So ban your brooms from the studio. I do not want to see you having a vacuum in the studio either. And that's because vacuums and brooms, mostly all they do is they throw the dust up into the air, and this is not good for our lungs. So all potters should have a basic understanding of the dangers of silica dust in causing a disease called silicosis. Basically what this means is silica dust, which is in our clays, in our glazes, all of the things that we use in the studio, it gets into our lungs, and over time, and we're talking like a few decades, this can cause a lot of damage to our lungs, and it'll make it really hard to breathe, and it's actually a fatal disease. So it's not something that you should be overly freaked out about because it does take years and years of buildup. However, it's something that you should consider if you're thinking about doing pottery long term. And you can mitigate most of the risks of silica dust just by following a few practices. And the first one is cleaning wet. All the time you need to clean wet. I should mention about silica dust that you may see the dust in your studio, and this is actually not the dangerous part because our lungs can actually filter out the larger particles. It's really these very, very fine particles that you don't even see. But this is the part that you actually need to be wary of. So after vacuuming or something, you may feel like your studio looks clean, but there's going to be all this dust in the air that you don't even see, that you don't even notice. Maybe you can smell it. This is the stuff that we need to be wary of. So along the lines of reducing exposure to silica dust, in general, I want you to just keep clean. Keep your pottery studio clean. That's already going to go a hugely long way. So what I mean by that is you should be wiping down your shelves regularly. This is why I have these slats instead of a board for shelves, not only because I wanted to save the cost of wood, but also because I know that all the dust is going to fall through to the floor, and then I can just mop up the floor. That's one less task that I have to do, so, work smarter, not harder. But there's still loads of surfaces that I need to clean. Like these guys, I always wipe down my bats after I use them. Wipe down your wear boards, keep your tools clean. Any shelving in your studio, you should be wiping down at least once a month. Do not let it go longer than that, because as much as we try to mitigate the silica dust that's in the air, it is still going to be in the air to some extent. So if you have a really dusty shelf and you go to grab something off your shelf, all of that dust is going to come down. Instead of, if you had freshly wiped it, you're going to grab that thing and a much, much smaller amount of dust is going to be exposed into the air at that point. So along these lines, I want you to also try as much as possible to keep your studio clutter-free. And now, I know that's really hard to do because there's always new glazes that we want to try. There's always new tools that we want to try. And then we're making stuff, right? So pots come out of the kiln and maybe there's a second or something and you don't know what to do with it, so it just goes up on a shelf. I know, I've been there. But all of this clutter is going to collect that dust, and I don't know about you, but I'm not going to be going in every day and wiping down every single item. I'd rather just have a clear surface where I can just wipe down in a second rather than going through and wiping each individual piece. So for me, my goal in the studio is to only have out the things that I'm actively using on a regular basis. And if you can, invest in something like drawers for your studio, because when it's in the drawer, I don't have to wipe it down. Or if you can get a cabinet, I've got this cabinet back here that's fully covered. It's got a cloth in front of it. That way I know that dust is not going to go in there, so that's one less thing that I have to clean. Of course, this is one huge benefit to having wire shelves, because then it's just one less surface you have to wipe. I have to wipe everything below the wire shelves because all that stuff falls through, but I don't have to wipe this shelf. So now I want to talk about an air filter. So I want you to do all of those things that I've already mentioned. You want to clean wet, you want to reduce clutter, etc. However, all of those things are not going to completely eliminate the dust in your studio. There's still going to be a small amount of dust that's in the air, and that's why I definitely encourage you to invest in an air filter. Which leads me to my very first sponsor. I feel like I'm a real YouTuber now. I'm not getting paid or anything, but Enviroklenz was kind enough to send me one of their filters so I could try it out. I was chatting with them about having a new studio, and I was honestly looking online at their filters already to see, maybe this is the option, because a lot of potters that I've talked to use this exact filter. And I had heard a lot of great things about it, so I was like, yes, please, awesome, let's do it. So yeah, I've been using this filter for a few weeks and it's been working awesome. I mean, you can definitely tell that the air is cleaner. I mean, I'm working in this basement studio and I have these lovely windows, which I open them regularly to air out the space, but there's not really like a through draft. So there's not a ton of air circulation, which is why I really wanted to get a filter. So yeah, this one is a super nice, high quality filter. You know it's definitely gonna do the job. It's got different settings here for like different strengths of air circulation. Sometimes when I'm working in here, especially when I'm doing like reclaim or something dusty, I'll turn it on the first setting just because it's kind of noisy as it's running and I'm usually like listening to music or something. But what I'll actually do is overnight, or if I know I'm gonna like leave the room for an hour or so, I'll turn it all the way up to max, and that way it can actually circulate all of the air in the room and just clean it. So when I come back, it's going to be nice and clean. So it's got two different filters. Now this top one is kind of like the large particle filter, and it's basically just going to catch like the larger things. So this is like pretty standard in all air filters. But what you really want, and whether or not you buy a filter from Enviroklenz, you're definitely going to want a filter that has a HEPA filter in it. So HEPA is like a grading system for like the fineness of the particles that it's going to filter through. And remember before I was talking about it's not the larger particles, it's the very, very small ones that you would need to be worried about. That's what the HEPA filter does. So this guy's pretty massive, and yeah, that's going to filter the larger particles of air. Yeah, and I mean, it's like a really simple machine, which I very much appreciate. I mean, it's not going to require very much maintenance at all. I mean, all you need to do is change the filters about every 6 months. And yeah, and that's pretty much it. Just wipe the top from time to time. It's super low maintenance. I'm really happy with this. Thank you so much, Enviroklenz, for sending me your filter. I'm kind of fangirling out a little bit. So the next thing in our studio safety list is a face mask. Right, so one of these guys. So you definitely want to be using a face mask anytime that you're dealing with anything powder, right? So like I use this all the time when I'm mixing glazes, even sometimes when I'm doing my reclaim, if I'm generating a lot of dust. This is basically a HEPA filter for your face. So it's definitely going to reduce the amount of dust that you're breathing in. So I got this one from my ceramic supplier, which is Karl Jaeger, but I think that you can get them from pretty much any ceramic supplier. If not, you can definitely get them at like a home improvement store. Yeah, and the same thing goes, definitely replace these every 6 months or so, and don't forget to wear it. So the fifth studio safety practice that I want to encourage y'all to implement in your studio is kiln venting. So kiln venting can look like this, where you actually have a tube attached to your kiln that goes out the window, or it can also look like your kiln is in a shed in the garden and that's it, like it's not attached to your house in any way, so none of those toxins are getting into your house. Or it can even look like you have a room that you can open up all the windows and you let your kiln fire and you don't enter that room and you let it air out for a while before you re-enter that room. All of this I would consider kiln venting. So basically you just don't want to be breathing in the fumes that your kiln is generating. So first of all, definitely don't be working in the room while your kiln is being fired, unless you have like an airtight vent, which some professionals do. I don't. Mine's not super airtight, although it does get the vast majority of the fumes out. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've worked in some sketchy studios before where they didn't have proper ventilation, and so there's like this specific smell that kilns make when they're giving off their fumes. You don't want to be smelling that. That's not good for you. Again, it's like this long-term exposure thing. I get it that like some people aren't in the position to have a separate room just for their kiln or something like that. I totally get that. But maybe then you want to look into alternative options like building a shed in your backyard. Or if you live in the city, maybe you can rent like a really small space where you can house your kiln, something like that. I mean, again, it's this long-term exposure thing, but it's definitely something that you want to be thinking about when you're setting up your new space, or if you're planning on working in a particular space for a longer period of time. So if you're curious how my system works, basically there's the inlet on the bottom where the air flows in, and this is the outlet. And because the hot air rises, it's going to all get sucked up into this tube. It's actually mixing with fresh air down here, and then it gets sucked up into this tube and it goes out. And then this tube, like I have it hanging on the inside right now because I'm not firing, but I can also hook it on the outside of the window so all of the fumes go out into the outside. So the final thing on a list that I want to talk to you about is ergonomics. I know, right? It's super boring, but I'm in my 30s now and I can definitely feel the impact of the studio on my body. So what I mean by ergonomics is moving your body in a way that you are not causing too much stress to your body. So let's take throwing on the wheel, for example. When you're throwing on the wheel, you want to have straight back as much as you possibly can. So you're going to be leaning over your wheel when you're working, but you want to keep that straight back as you're working. So I don't want you hunching over and pushing the clay like with your shoulders. I want you to keep your shoulders back, keep your back straight, and just pivot with your hips. So you keeping your back straight and you're just leaning forward at your hips so that you can put your whole back and your whole body weight into that clay. Not only is it going to save you a lot of pain, but this is actually the proper way that you want to be throwing because you're going to be putting a lot more force into your clay. And if you're having trouble centering, this might be the problem. Another thing to keep in mind when you're throwing is besides the part where you're leaning forward, you want all of your angles to be at 90 degrees. So you want your foot to be directly beneath your knee. You want your knee to be at a 90-degree angle. And I also really encourage you to keep your legs the same height. So most of us, we keep our feet on the wheel while we're throwing. So I always put like a brick or a piece of wood in this case, right underneath my left foot. And this is going to keep my legs at the exact same height, which gives me a lot more balance. And in the end, a lot more power when I'm throwing, but also like it keeps my body centered and yeah, it just helps. Same thing goes with your studio furniture, so your tables and your chairs. I've mentioned this before, but when I built this table, I built it custom to my exact height because I'm not necessarily an average sized person. And so for me, this is really important because I knew I was going to be spending a lot of time at this table, that this table made sense for my height. Because oftentimes things are a little bit too tall for me, so I end up getting like aches and pains in my shoulders. I haven't gotten around yet to getting a smaller sized chair for my short body because when I sit on normal chairs, my feet don't reach the ground, at least not fully, maybe my toes. I'm pretty short. And so what I did, because I didn't want to like cut off the legs of a chair to make it shorter, I built a beam underneath this table that allows me to rest my feet on this beam. So when I'm sitting at the table, you know, handling for hours or whatever, I can rest my feet on this beam, which means that I don't get the blood circulation cut off on my legs if I just let them dangle. Short person problems. But even if you're tall or your body is different in its own unique and beautiful way, definitely consider that when you're designing and setting up your studio, especially if you're going to be spending a lot of time in it. And the last thing I want to say about ergonomics is I want you to keep in mind the risk of repetitive stress injuries. And what this means is when you're doing the same exact motion over and over for hours on end. Or even if you're not doing it for hours, if you're doing it only for a shorter time, but you're doing it every single day, this can cause strain on your joints and your tendons and all that stuff when they're doing the same motion over and over again. So whether that's throwing on the wheel for hours on end, or if you're pinching a bunch of pinch pots, I mean, you'll probably feel it in your wrist after a little while. You want to be paying attention to what your body is telling you in these moments. Take a break, do some of these stretches if it's your wrists, otherwise do some back stretches, whatever you need to do. It's probably a good idea to do stretches every time that you enter and leave the studio, just like you're exercising, because this is very physical work. And I want you to be able to do this for a really long time. So yeah, keep these safety tips in mind. Definitely implement them in your studio as much as you can so you can create the most safe workspace for you going forward. So I hope that that video was helpful for you. If you have any questions or comments, definitely leave them in the comments down below, or you can find me over on Instagram at Pottery to the People. Otherwise, I wish you a wonderful and creative day. Bye, friends.